definitions in other dictionaries. So then I started looking for a definition in various dictionaries, but one of those dictionaries was the Dictionary of the Royal Academy of Spanish Language, because I was doing my PhD at that time, and I had to check definition of language in English, definition of language in Urdu, and definition of language in Spanish. So for the Spanish dictionary, language is an oral and almost always written communication system, specific of a human community, but so is dialect. And then it was also a language system whose speakers recognize as a model of good expression. And then it gave an example, the language of Cervantes, and Cervantes is a Spanish writer, which means he's talking about a Spanish language, is official in 21 nations. So it means that the Spanish language is official in 21 nations. So that is the example that the Spanish dictionary was giving. And then the fourth definition was linguistic system considered in a structure. And the fifth one was vocabulary and grammar, specific and characteristic of an era, of a writer, or a social group grammar. The language of Góngora, Gaucho language. So Góngora is also a Spanish writer. So this actually didn't help me very much, because then I had to check the definition of dialect. And in the Oxford dictionary stated that dialect came from Greek via Latin, dialectus, and the definition that it gave was discourse way of speaking. From dialectstyle, converse with, a particular form of a language which is peculiar to a specific region or social group. So this was also not very scientific in my view. And then I went back to the Spanish dictionary for the definition of dialect. And it said that it came from the Latin dialectus, and this one from the Greek dialectus. It is a linguistic system considered in relation to the group of several derivatives of a common trunk. So it means that there is one common trunk and various linguistic systems are derived from that common trunk. And Spanish is one of those dialects born of Latin. So yes, because Spanish is a Romance language and Romance languages are derived from Latin. The second definition was linguistic system derived from another, usually with a specific geographical limitation, but without enough differentiation in front of others with common origin. So this one was a little better, this definition. And then linguistic structure, simultaneous to another that misses the social category of language. But it never explained what was the social category of language and how it's different from that of dialect. And it's a social category. Again, it's not a linguistic category, and it is not a scientific category. So my problem was that the dictionaries didn't provide very scientific definitions of language. So for a linguist not to have a definition of language is a big loss. Basically, I was at that time without a definition, a proper definition, or a scientific definition that I could work with. So then what I do, I went and started looking for scientific definitions of language from other research. And then it was very clear to me that first of all, the dictionaries didn't agree on a definition of language or dialect, but also the researchers also didn't agree with a definition of language. And then there were different researchers and scientists and linguists, and all of them had their own interpretation of the word language. And then I decided to check a language database, which is called Ethnologue, Languages of the World. And they were also stating that not all linguists agree with the criteria for language identification. So what they said is not all scholars share the same criteria for distinguishing what level of divergence distinguishes a language from a dialect. And therefore, the terms are not always consistently applied. So if a linguist doesn't have a scientific definition of language, And if a linguist doesn't have a scientific definition of dialect, how are we linguists? So that was a question for me when I was a student. So I started researching people who had talked about this. And then I found this Spanish researcher. His name was Manuel Alvar. And in 1961, he talked about this. And he said that he provided a definition according to some criteria, which was comparatively a lot more scientific than anything I have seen. So he stated that to be a language, a linguistic system had to have a strong differentiation among others. So every language has strictly defined rules, such as grammar, phonetics, orthography, and these are used through teaching, media, and other manifestation in society. And this is how they transmit from generation to generation. It also said that for a linguistic system to be a language, it had to have a high degree of leveling. What does this mean, high degree of leveling? High degree of leveling means that there is a large number of speakers. So the linguistic community is coherent and more or less numerous in members. So when a linguistic system has many speakers, it is considered a language according to Manuel Alvar. Then the linguistic system has to be the vehicle of an important literary tradition. So it not only has to have a written form, but also many writers have to have used the language in their literary works, like in novels, in poetry, in essays. And because of this, it has distinguished itself from others that had the same origin. So before we were saying that the Spanish language is a language of 21 nations, according to the Spanish dictionary. The English language is also a language of many nations, right? So they are considered languages because not only they have a high degree of leveling, but they also have an important literary tradition. It means that so many writers have used the language to transmit their thoughts, to write different poetries, to write different novels and essays, etc., etc. And the fourth point that Alvar had was that it has imposed itself on other linguistic systems of the same origin. For example, there are various linguistic systems that derive from, or various languages that derive from another language. And some of them have remained in an inferior level, and some of them have expanded and have been more productive than the other ones. And the ones that have remained inferior, maybe they don't have established rules like grammar or dictionaries, etc., etc., while the other ones had important literary traditions, dictionaries, etc., etc. So for Manuel Alvar, this was the definition of language, a linguistic system that fit into these characteristics. So he also had a definition of dialect. And according to his definition of dialect, a dialect is a system of signs or a linguistic system derived from a common language, alive or extinct, normally within a concrete geographical limitation, but without a strong differentiation in front of others of common origin. So let's say, for example, if we talk about the languages of Pakistan, some varieties of Punjabi language or some dialect of Punjabi language. You look at Punjabi and it is the main language, right? It is the language. And for example, Shapuri, Maji, and other dialects are there, and they don't have a strong differentiation between themselves because they derive from a common origin. And in a secondary manner, dialects are those linguistic structures simultaneous to others which do not reach the category of language, right? So for Manuel Alvar, these were the definition of language and dialect. So for me, this was much better, but I didn't think it was enough. So I continued research in this, and I came up with my own proposal. So I did take some points from Alvar, and then I added points of my own. So my first point was that the linguistic system for language, the linguistic system should present a high degree of leveling, which is a large number of speakers spread over one or more geographical areas. And the language community should present language coherence. Number two, it presents an elevated differentiation degree. Differentiation degree, it means that it can very well differentiate itself from other linguistic systems. Number three, the linguistic system has thrived over others of the same origin, which have not presented the same level of success, remaining without some of the same factors that make the former successful. For example, a high number of speakers, or maybe they don't have proper rules, or things of that sort. Then point number four is that the language enjoys a high level of prestige. What is prestige in terms of language? For example, Urdu is the national language of Pakistan, and it is also since 2015 the official language. So that is a high level of prestige when a language is an official language and also a national language, or it is a language of the United Nations or some other international organization. So that is prestige in terms of a language. And then the linguistic system presents manifestations as well as grammar rules of orthography, phonetics, syntax, etc., etc. Number six, the linguistic system is utilized as a medium of instruction. That means that it is being used to teach in schools and universities or universities. Seven, the linguistic system is spread through television channels, newspapers, radio, and other media manifestations in society, such as the internet, etc. And eight, the linguistic system presents a vast literary tradition of which is vehicle and includes many forms of literary expression, such as prose, poetry, essays, etc., etc. So that was my proposal for the definition of language. And then for the definition of dialect, the dialect is a linguistic system derived from another, which could be extinct or in use, and which falls into the mentioned parameters of a language. It means that the language from which they derive, or it derives, or the linguistic system from which it derives was actually a language. So this one is an inferior form of that language, or a dialect. It is a system of signs which is parallel to others, which present similar characteristics, which are also derived from a common language, alive or extinct. It is present within a specific geographic area. It does not present a strong differentiation in front of other linguistic systems of common origin. It doesn't adjust to the criteria of language, which are apart from the previous mentioned in the definition of language, a literary tradition, a strong leveling with a high number of speakers, high level of prestige, being the medium of instruction, being used as the language of the media, written manifestations, formal rules such as grammar, syntax, morphology, etc. So when I came up with that definition, after a lot of thought, so I decided to test this with some linguistic systems of Pakistan. So somebody has requested me to do that with Siraiki. At the beginning, I was a little, reluctant to touch Siraiki language because I thought that Siraiki people are very nice, and if I come up with analysis that contradict their thoughts, they're going to be upset with me. But this is not like political analysis, and this is not a sociological analysis. It's only a linguistic analysis. So then I was convinced to go ahead and analyze the system, the linguistic system, and find out whether, according to this definition, it would be a dialect or a language. So first I investigated some of the particular issues of the Siraiki community, and I realized that the Siraikis community didn't see themselves as a separate ethnic group until about the 60s. And on the basis of this separate ethnicity, which is, what is ethnicity? Ethnicity is not race. A lot of people confuse race with ethnicity. Ethnicity is not race. Race is in your DNA, and ethnicity is not physical, or it cannot be transmitted in the blood from generation to generation, right? So ethnicity is a set of cultural traditions and also language, and it is not something which is genetic, right? So on the basis of ethnicity and language, they have created an identity, and on the basis of this separate identity, they have been requesting a separate province. And it has not happened so far due to various issues which had to do with politics and other matters which are not of importance here. So I put the linguistic system through the definition, and then it had a very high degree of leveling. Okay, so the Siraiki community has about 20 million speakers, which is a little bit less than the population of Spain. So it is a lot of speakers, 20,068,000 speakers. Does it have a high degree of differentiation? So then I compared the Siraiki language with other languages of the same area. And for example, with Western Punjabi, it has a 70 to 85% lexical similarity. With Sindhi, it has an 85% similarity, and it is mutually intelligible with both. However, Punjabi and Sindhi are regional languages, so that confers them a level of prestige. Okay, they are also considered languages, and there is no doubt about it. Then we went to the point of thriving over others. So no, for example, Urdu is thriving, Punjabi and Sindhi are thriving. It is thriving over smaller languages, but it is not thriving over other languages of Pakistan, like the regional languages, national and official language. Does it have a high level of prestige? Over here, I was really, really sad because the Siraiki community has so many speakers. At the same time, it doesn't have a high level of prestige because what happens is that the Siraiki community, what I found in my investigation, is that the Siraiki community has a 1% literacy rate, or 1.5% literacy rate. So due to these facts, Siraiki is not obviously an official language. It's not a national language or even a regional language, unfortunately. Okay. Then it does have some written manifestations. For example, a grammar, a dictionary. It uses the Chamuki script, which is also used for Punjabi. It has a local newspaper. So these efforts are very good and they should increase. But at the moment, they are not enough to fulfill this definition of language. Is it a medium of instruction? No, unfortunately, it is not used as a medium of instruction in schools or universities. Is it a language of the media? In a limited manner, yes. Some programs in radio stations and TV, and as I said before, one newspaper. Does it have a vast literary tradition? Unfortunately, it has a very limited literary tradition due mainly to the level of literacy of its speakers, and some efforts have been made by cultural members of the Siraiki community, but unfortunately, it's not a very extensive literary tradition. So it doesn't, the results indicate that it doesn't comply with the great majority of the criteria for language. So it only fully complies with the first criteria. So then we put the Siraiki language towards the definition of dialect. So is it derived from another language? It seems to be that yes, it derives from another language because it has a similarity level of 70 to 85% with Western Punjabi and 85% with Sindhi. However, to find out exactly from where it derives, which language it derives, we need to have a genetical similarity analysis, which this is not something that I did in this particular article. So I cannot tell you at this moment whether it derives from Punjabi, it derives from Sindhi, or it derives from any other language. Is it parallel with others which present similar characteristics? So as in the point before, yes, it is parallel to Western Punjabi and Sindhi as well. Is it present within a specific geographic area subordinate to the national state? So yes, in some areas of Punjab, in some areas of Sindh, in KPK and Balochistan. Does it have a high degree of differentiation or not a high degree of differentiation? Yes, it doesn't have a high degree of differentiation as already stated in points number 1 and 2. So does it adjust to the criteria of language? No, it does not adjust to the criteria of language as it has been explained in table number 1. So, so yes, it seems to be that Siraiki is a dialect. And, you know, when I came up with this article, I received some comments from the Siraiki community members saying that for us, Siraiki is a language. So that is fine. Everybody has their own choice. I have just looked at it from a linguistic point of view, not from a sociology point of view or a political point of view, or even from an ethnological point of view. It's only from a linguistic point of view. And I based my research on whatever research was already available there. So, so yes, according to the prestige, according to the written manifestations, according to rules, this doesn't seem to comply with all the criteria set for a language. And that was that for now. And if we have some time for questions, we can go ahead and do that.
Yes, if there's any question, please raise your hand.
There are some questions here in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Visit chat box and I think there are certain questions. Adnan, let me know if there is any question from Facebook.
So what is the question?
And there are certain hands raised.
Yes.
Take the questions.
Those who can ask questions, those who want to ask questions can ask questions. Yes, Sir Nasir has a question. Sir, please unmute your mic and please ask question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maria, for this very good, very excellent and nice presentation, which is very enlightening for me. And however, I have some, of course, some reservations regarding the differences between Saraiki and Punjabi. Is my voice quite audible to you? Are you hearing me properly?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes.
So, as you know, I'm a phonologist, so I will, if I focus only on phonology, I find a very big difference between Punjabi and Saraiki in terms of phonemes, in terms of implosives.
Yes, Dr. Nasser, before you go ahead, the lexical similarity is based on orthography. This lexical similarity is not based on phonology, okay?
If we discuss language structure, then phonology is prior to orthography. So from that point of view, there is a big difference, and many characteristics like palatalization does exist in Saraiki. There is a very strong palatalization in Saraiki, which we found in Russian languages, but not in Pakistani languages. Of course, I think it's found in Kashmiri, but not in Punjabi or Urdu language. Similarly, we have a very strong nasalization in Saraiki, which is lacking in Punjabi. And we have implosives, which Punjabi language, of course, lacks. And we have, if we see from a morphological and syntactic point of view, we have strong pronominal suffixes, double pronominal suffixation with verbs, which is a feature which we find in Romani, Kashmiri, and Persian, and Sindhi, of course. And all these features we see do exist in Sindhi. So from this point of view, if we see similarities, then we are more, so Saraiki is more similar to Sindhi as compared, and you yourself has said it's 85% similarity between Sindhi and Saraiki, and 70 to 75, 85% between Sindhi and Saraiki. So, and on the other hand, if we see similarities between Urdu and Punjabi, more than these similarities can be found between Urdu and Punjabi. So my question is then why not?
right.
Why shouldn't we, as a student, a naive student of linguistics, I just wonder why shouldn't we declare Punjabi as a dialect of Urdu or Saraiki as a dialect of Sindhi?
Right. That will be an interesting point of view. But for that, we had to have a genetic analysis of these languages and see from where these languages derive.
May I comment on this?
Sure, of course.
Okay. So according to the linguists, Orientalists, Saraiki has been placed in Western Indo-Aryan group and Punjabi with Urdu and Hindi in Eastern group. And as long as its origin is concerned, there is a large consensus among the Western linguists, whom we definitely trust more, that Saraiki is very much closer and originated from Sindhi, not from Punjabi.
But there is also research that doesn't have any definite genetic analysis on that. So I didn't want to venture because I was not making a genetic analysis. I was just making a differentiation between language and dialect. So I have not investigated the genetic affiliations of Saraiki. I have just seen if it is quite similar to one or another one. And it came out that it was similar to these two. And if you check on Ethnologue, Ethnologue says that Saraiki is actually a language. So, but that is because they have their own definition of language that they're following. So as you know very well, many linguists have their own definition and they apply their own definition of language. And this is why we have so many differences of opinion everywhere.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Sir Nasir, for asking this question. We have a question from Professor Dr. Asir Ajmal, Dean of Social Science University. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maria, for this brilliant presentation. Because before listening to your talk, I always considered the question of dialect versus language a political question, and didn't think, for a second that because I had friends who would argue that Saraiki is a separate language, and I have other friends who are equally sort of adamant
Dr. Asir, I'm unable to hear you properly.
Hello? Yes. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, sir, you are clearly audible.
Okay. So I think this is the first time I've seen a very comprehensive and clear distinction, a scientifically clear distinction between language and a dialect. And it helps resolve this problem for me, that whether it is clearly a political issue only, or there are other dimensions of it. But what would you say? I mean, I was just listening to Dr. Nasir, and it seems like that once one takes a political position, it is very hard to back down, and one can always find reasons.
Yes. I mean, if I have only looked at this from a linguistic point of view and based on the research that was available. That, as I said before, this is not a political definition of language. This is not a sociological or an ethnological definition of language. It's just a linguistic definition of language. One of the many other definitions of languages that are around. Turab, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are very
You are
clear,
audible, you
Maria.
are audible.
Okay. Okay. Because I am having a hard time hearing Dr. Asif.
Okay. From chat, we have a question from Wakas Iftihar. Shouldn't the world have an international language that must be taught in every country?
Well, there are more than 7,000 languages around the world. And I believe that if we just had one international language, a lot of the culture will disappear actually, because different languages are the beauty of this world, you know. And we already have one international language, which is English. English is spoken almost everywhere, right? So it has approximately 1.2 billion speakers, which and not all of them are definitely not native. So why do we have to have such loss in the world? I mean, we are all linguists. We thrive from having different languages. There are expressions in languages that cannot be translated to other languages. So if we check, for example, some Punjabi expressions. I was having a conversation with Saima the other day when she came to Al-Andalus, and I was telling her that if you try to translate the Punjabi expression "achak de patte" to any other language, it will not make any sense. But to a Punjabi speaker, that makes a lot of sense, right? So the beauty of national, languages and official languages and all kinds of linguistic systems will be lost if we had only one international language. There are words that are unable to be translated as well, like for example, roti. Roti, we will have to say is a round flat bread, and you can just say roti and with one word. But why should we have to say one round flat bread from Pakistan? So it's better to say roti. Everybody who is related to the Pakistani community understand what roti is. And roti could be a long word in English language, in Pakistani English, for example. And there are so many words from Arabic in Urdu, like namaz, right? Like this kind of things, you know. So if we had one international language, all of this beauty will disappear. It's good to have one international language in terms of globalization so that we can all understand each other. But we already have it. That's English. And we shouldn't lose our own. That's my opinion.
Thank you. We have another question from chat. It's from Biswandan, Anandan, I don't know how to pronounce it. The pioneer linguist and Yiddish scholar Max had a quote: "A language is a dialect with an army and navy." His point being that the difference between language and dialect had a little to do with linguistics.
Sorry, I just connected and I couldn't hear the question, if there was one.
Okay, it's a question from this Vanandan, that the pioneering linguist and Yiddish.
Is there a question?
Yes, it's a question. The pioneering linguist and the pioneering
I'm unable to hear.
linguist and Yiddish scholar Max had a quote: "A language is a dialect with an army and navy." His point being that the difference between language and
Sorry,
dialect.
I'm unable to hear you. Can you repeat?
Okay, let me.
Maria, it is in chat.
I'm Aziz, can you read this for her?
Sure. This question is: the pioneering linguist and Yiddish scholar Max had a quote that a language is a dialect with an army and navy. His point being that the difference between a language and a dialect was ultimately a political distinction and had little to do with linguistics per se. Linguists, however, do make a distinction between the two based on the concept of mutual intelligibility. Two languages where speakers can understand each other are considered dialects of the same language, whereas two languages where the speakers cannot understand each other are indeed separate languages. Dr. Maria, what is your judgment in this regard?
Saima, can you please repeat the question, please? I couldn't hear that.
All right.
Ms. Maria, I have forwarded the question to you. You can read it.
Yes.
It is in chat, I think.
It's in chat.
It's in chat.
Shall I read, Maria?
Sure, please.
Yeah. He says that pioneering linguists and Yiddish scholar Max Wendrich had a quote that a language is a dialect with an army and navy.
Yeah.
His point being that the difference between a language and a dialect was ultimately a political distinction and had little to do with linguistics per se. Linguists, however, do make a distinction between the two based on the concept of mutual intelligibility. Two languages where speakers can understand each other are considered dialects of the same language, whereas two languages where the speakers cannot understand each other are indeed separate languages. So what is your judgment in this regard, Dr. Maria?
Yes, what I think of that is that both of the statements are interrelated. Like, for example, a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. What does it mean? That it has a high level, has high leveling, right? It has a large number of speakers. That's what it means, right? Okay. So that is one of the criteria of the definition of language, that it has a high number of speakers. Now, she says that linguists, however, do make a distinction between the two based on the concept of mutual intelligibility. However, if I talk with an Italian person, I will understand what that person is saying. Okay, and if the Italian person speaks to me in Italian, I will understand what that person is saying. Why? Because Spanish and Italian come from Latin, and they are the dialects of Latin. However, due to their large number of speakers and their large literary tradition and rules that are set for them, they are languages. So at some point in time, languages, unless they are language isolates, they are usually derived from other languages. Like, for example, Urdu is a national language, it's an official language, but it's a dialect of Sanskrit. So that is my answer to that.
Thank you very much. Next question is from
You're
Nasir
welcome.
Ahmed. Nasir Ahmed is asking, if a language does have a characteristics of prestige and a dialect as a stigmatized, in which category does a standard dialect fall?
A standard dialect, for example, let's say Majhi, is the standard Punjabi language, right? So it's still a dialect of Punjabi, but it's the most spoken dialect of Punjabi. So a standard dialect is a dialect that is it has its own standardization process which it has gone through.
Thank you. Another question.
I don't believe that many dialects are stigmatized. There are many valuable dialects all over the world. Why does it have to be stigmatized? This is something in our head. I don't believe that dialects need to be stigmatized, but I have found that many linguists don't want to say that a particular linguistic system is a dialect because the speakers of that linguistic system feel bad about it. See, and the question is the same thing. And if a language does have a characteristic of prestige and a dialect is stigmatized, why stigmatized? Maybe it's not a national linguistic system or official, but why stigmatized? Not necessarily that it has to be like that.
Thank you. Another question is from Hadi Hedri. How to formally ask for teaching our mother tongue in official setting?
In official settings, yes, this is a very important question. You know, I believe that the great majority of linguists of Pakistan believe that children of Pakistan should be taught in their mother tongue. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we have so many languages. Ethnologues cite 76 languages. And also, unfortunately, we do not have the resources to be able to create textbooks in all of those languages. And we do not have the teachers to be able to teach in all of those mother tongues. So I believe, and I don't know if Dr. Nasser will support me on this. I think maybe he will. But if the government created some space for these things, maybe the situation will improve. Because it's very important that a child learns in his or her mother tongue and learns as many languages as possible. Because yes, because people, when people are small, when they are children, they have the capacity. Okay. So I was saying that when we are children, we have the capacity to learn as many languages as possible. So our mother tongue should be one of them. However, I think the politicians are at a loss here because first of all, they are not linguists and they don't understand how linguistic works. And second, we linguists understand how linguistic works, but we don't have the resources to implement these things. So yes, I would love that every child in Pakistan learn in a school with their mother tongue as medium of instruction, but I think that that's going to be quite difficult. I don't know what the situation is in Iran. You are from Iran, right? So I don't know what the situation is in Iran and how many languages you have there apart from Persian language and Farsi. But that's something you guys will have to manage yourselves. Over here, we're having a very difficult time trying to implement mother tongues as medium of instruction.
Thank you. Another question is again from Dr. Dash, India. How can I differentiate between a language and a dialect when it is subjected to a political agenda? The concept is, however, based upon mutual intelligibility. Two languages where speakers can understand each other are considered dialect of the same language, whereas two languages where the speaker cannot understand each other are indeed separate languages.
But that is a different definition.
Madam Maria, please ignore this question. You have already answered that question.
I've already answered, yes.
And,
I have already answered this.
Had did, because while I filled up the Google form at that time, they were asked the question to give.
Okay.
If you have any doubt, that time I have placed that question. But now
No
I have
problem.
already given the question which you have already answered.
Yes,
So
I was thinking that I had answered it. It's all right. No problem.
Please ignore, because they might have copied from that Google form question herein by Dr. Hussain. So please ignore. You have already answered. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Dash. Amir Ali is asking a question. How do you think the Saraikis movement for their ethnic prowess is influencing their definition of language?
Well, because they believe that they have a language and whatever they speak is a language for them. And that is their own definition of this linguistic system. And they, at some point, had a very strong movement, which was based on their culture and their language or their linguistic system. So for me as a linguist, I believe it's a dialect. But if we look at it from only from a linguistic point of view, if we look at it from a political, sociological, and ethnographic or ethnological point of view, So there are other factors involved in this matter.
Thank you. Another question is from Nazia. If Saraiki does not fall in a regional language due to its low literacy rate, can we think in future it will be a regional language?
Well, that also will depend on the politics, right? If they achieve their goal of having a province, so they might make their linguistic system a regional language, right? So that depends on political factors.
Well, another question is from Maria Nisar. How can we judge differences and similarities between language and a dialect?
How can we judge differences and similarities between languages and dialects? I have provided, sorry?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have provided definitions for the classification of languages and dialects. This is a classification that anybody can use, and everybody can use their own classification. Every linguist has their own definition or uses their own particular definition. And I have seen linguists that don't use any definition. They are open to multiple definitions. Differences and similarities, this is what I have already classified in my research. So I think that my presentation is the answer to your question.
Yes, another question is from Professor Nazir Ahmed. Sorry, comment, not a question. Quite impressive lecture, but political, cultural, economic, and historical perspectives are equally important criteria to draw difference between language and a dialect.
Very good. Exactly. That is exactly what I have said at the beginning, that this is just a linguistic definition. And my article has limitations to the study, which is limited to linguistics. I have not had in consideration any political, economic, cultural, and historical factors when making this classification.
Thank you. Amir Ali is asking a question. I would like to ask a question. Why do we have word Englishes, not dialects of English? While we have dialects for Urdu or Sindhi, English has languages, while other languages have dialects.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. Thank you for asking that. You see, world Englishes operate in countries, right? And then we have dialects of Urdu that may be operationable in Pakistan and India, right? And the major standard languages are the official languages and the regional languages. But for the world Englishes, I was doing some investigation on Paki, because I am investigating Paki nowadays, and there are issues, because initially there are phases in which when English arrives to a particular country, initially it's a foreign language, right? And then it is viewed by the population as a foreign language. And then if we, when let's say Paki, for example, when we speak Paki, we have already adapted Paki and features of English are in Paki because it's English, but also there are features of other languages of Pakistan, for example, Urdu. And we have utilized prefixes, we have utilized affixes of Urdu that are mixed with the English that we speak here. And this is why it is another language rather than a dialect, okay? But if you go to, for example, England, and you look at the Englishes of England, they are dialects of English. And if you go to the United States and you go to Massachusetts, they will speak a different dialect of American English. And if you go to South Carolina, they will speak a different dialect of American English. So it is not like that, that English, world Englishes are not dialect. They are not dialects because they are operationable in countries, while dialects of English are operationable in countries that already have a standard language, which is English of Britain, English of the United States, Australian English, Canadian English, etc., etc.
Dr. Maria, I would like to add something to your views. Hindi have 49 varieties, and English also in UK also there are so many varieties. And English
Absolutely.
operates in one standard English lexicon that you can see available in all the dictionary. That is, we refer every dictionary in English by all over the world. That is why we say world English. And there are many varieties. That means what I think is the way and means of pronunciation.
There are also lexical particles, lexical items.
The lexical particle would definitely vary because the way you will pronounce each word, there will be definitely some lexical variation. That doesn't mean that we can say dialect even in UK also. Do you agree with my statement, Dr. Maria?
I believe, yes, I believe that a standard American English is different from standard British English. And for example, in the United States, we have the word trash for the things that we put in the trash can, right? But in England, we have, but we also have the word garbage that operates in other places, right? So there are different lexical items, and it's not necessarily that one word will be pronounced differently. There are different words as well. So that's why it's world Englishes, because the Englishes are different in every place.
Yeah, can I just say something?
With pronunciation as well, with phonetics as well, absolutely.
Yes. I would just like to...
Sure, sir.
Dr. Maldonado. Yes, I was about to add, I worked in Lincolnshire in England for 7 years. And when I went there around the villages to talk to people, I could barely understand what they were saying. And then I discovered a dictionary of their dialect. Their dialect is called Doggery Ball. And there are so many words, hundreds of words that do not even exist in the standard English language.
Absolutely.
So I was quite shocked.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we have a question from Khadija.
Yes.
Dialect permission similar to code switching?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Is dialect permission similar to code switching?
No. Code switching is a different thing, and dialect is a different thing. Code switching is when you switch from one language to another while you are speaking. Let's say you are speaking in Urdu and all of a sudden you switch to English. That is code switching, but dialect is not related to this.
Thank you. Question from Sobia Yunus. Are British American English separate dialects? They have large numbers of speakers spoken in different geographical areas and are taught in schools, etc.
They are not separate dialects. They are not dialects. They are a standard in their own country.
Okay, another question from Manjol. Australian English is not understood by most of the other varieties of English speakers, but it is still dialect of English, a dialect of English. And there are many languages in the world which are oral. They don't have any written literature and also not used in media, but still they are languages.
Okay, so there are 2 points here. One point is that Australian English is not understood and by the other varieties of English speakers, but still a dialect of English. It's a dialect of English in the sense that it has derived from, let's say, British English, but it is a standard language. It is a standard Australian English. So it's not a dialect per se. It's although strictly speaking, it's a dialect of British English, but now it's a language in its own right. Okay. And then the other point is that there are many linguistic systems that are oral. Yes, there are many linguistic systems that are oral. For example, I was watching a video on YouTube the other day where people were communicating through whistling. So obviously this is an oral language. And one lady was asking to another lady in a mountain that, what have you cooked for your husband today? And they were just whistling and they could understand the meanings of the whistle. So yes, there are many oral linguistic systems. I wouldn't call them language, but if it is a language, it has a large number of speakers. And if it has a large number of speakers, usually those linguistic systems are languages if they have all of the other characteristics.
Thank you. Before moving to another question, let me announce that the survey link is by Adnan, and everyone is requested to fill the survey form, and the responses will be allowed till 12 a.m. After 12 a.m., the responses will not be accepted. And we have a question from Nasir Ahmed. How is it possible to manage the resources to teach every child in his mother tongue, and especially when a number of 30 students of different mother tongues are present in a class?
In a situation like that, it is not possible to teach everyone in their mother tongue. I remember when I was in my university in the first year, there were students from all over the world. And there were students from China, from Spain, from many different places, from Africa. And the teacher was just teaching us English, and he was teaching us in English. When you have a classroom where the native speakers are native from many different languages, you cannot use their mother tongue. That is a clear fact of life.
Thank you. We have a question from Abdullah Muhammad from Bangladesh. How to document dialectal differences of an endangered language?
Dialectal differences of an endangered language, but you need to do that as soon as possible because it's endangered, number one. Number two, you need to have a team of linguists which are expert in every branch of linguistics, like say phonetics, syntax, morphology, lexicography, etc., etc. So each one of these people can, and also best of all, if they could be native of that language, that would be the best. But if sometimes those resources are not available.
Thank you. We have another question from Shahabullah. If dialects are mutually intelligible, then the Kandahari dialect of Pashto spoken in Kandahar, Peta dialect of Pashto spoken in Peta, Balochistan, and Yusufzai dialect of Pashto spoken in northern Pakistan are not mutually intelligible.
If they are not mutually intelligible, then they don't derive usually from the same language. Okay, but if they are, so then they obviously the thought is that they derive from the same language. I am not an expert in Pashto, so I cannot tell you exactly what are their the phonetic characteristics or the syntactic characteristics of these dialects that you are speaking about. But if those dialects are not mutually intelligible, then it's an indication that they don't derive from the same language.
We have another question from Amir Ali. In case of mutually intelligible dialects or even intelligibility, is there any possibility of development of dialects Creole among the speakers of the same language?
Dialect Creole? Mutually unintelligible dialect or even intelligibility. I'm having a hard time understanding this question.
Okay. So
what is a dialect Creole?
Yes, could you please Amir Ali, could you please explain what's a dialect Creole if you are here in the participants?
Yes, brother, I am here.
Sure.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, actually, I am speaking on the basis of observed reality. This reality I have observed in Karachi. In Karachi, there are speakers of Sindhi language from different areas, and the speakers speak different languages or different dialects of Sindhi. So when they come to live in Karachi from different areas, they develop a common dialect. For example, speakers coming from northern Sindh and speakers coming from southern Sindh, they speak two different dialects. But when they live in the same area in Karachi, they gradually develop same characteristics of the Sindhi language, and they gradually develop linguistic characteristics which are which consist both the characteristics of the northern and southern dialects. So that's
So
why I asked
I
this question.
wouldn't, I wouldn't use the word dialect Creole to explain this. I will say that this is just another factor of language evolution and contact, language contact and language evolution. And plus
Yes,
it's Sindhi.
perhaps,
So
yes.
Anyone having any question? So I think we have done the questions from the chat, and there is no questions from the participants who are here on Zoom and Facebook as well.
Yes, Mr. Hussain.
Yes, yes, Sir Fakar, Sir Farooq. Yes, please.
Aji, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Gift University and Dr. Maria. It's a wonderful session. My question is about Maji dialect. That we are part here in Gujranwala. We are part of that Maji dialect, and people are feeling hesitation while speaking that Maji dialect. Even the mothers are not speaking with the children. Fathers are not using at home, and even as a teacher, we are not using in universities. So, is it going towards that endangered dialects or endangered languages? If it is going towards how what can we do to save it? Thank you
yes,
very much.
yes. Actually, it's very interesting that you asked this question because see, this collaboration for this seminar is also collaborating in another project for the revitalization of Punjabi language. When I arrived to Pakistan in 2004, the Punjabi speakers were about 45% of the population. At this moment, they are 37, 38% of the population. And we have all noticed that the parents are avoiding to speak Punjabi with their children, and their children are not speaking Punjabi, they are speaking Urdu, they are speaking English. And Punjabi seems to be with such a jump in the last 18 years, which is, it has received a blow of 7% of the population all of a sudden not speaking Punjabi. So it seems to be that the parents are kind of ashamed of teaching this fantastic language to their children. So this is something that not only us linguists, but everyone has to start changing in our society, because we cannot lose Punjabi language just because all of a sudden the parents are ashamed of this language. And how did they become ashamed of the language? This is something I can't understand. But it's again, it's a psychological matter. It's a matter of prestige. So I was talking with Saima and the team of GIFT, and we were thinking that perhaps we should have some type of a awareness campaign to make sure that the Punjabi language is transmitted from generation to generation, because this is a wealth of our country, right? So this is something that can be lost just like that. And the parents' attitude needs to be investigated. Why is it like that, that all of a sudden there is this not transmission from one generation to another generation of the language?
Thank you. We have a question from Fazil. There is often considerable difficulty in deciding whether two linguistic varieties of dialect are the same language or two separate but closely related languages. What could possibly be the reason for this difficulty? I think Professor Maria lost the connection. Let's wait a little for her. so that she can join us again. Let me call her.
She is rejoining.
Yes, she will join us soon. Yes, she will join us soon. Sorry for the technical problems. This link has been shared frequently, so all the participants are requested to please fill the survey form, and please also make sure that you write the email correctly, because previously we had faced problem as emails are not correct, and the system responds that this email does not exist. So please make sure that you write correct email and your correct name as per documents, so that we can send you certificates. Fazeen, you're trying to get Maria back. Inshallah, she will answer your question. When she's back, she will definitely answer your question. She will be back in a minute.
Sorry about that. Actually, I lost the connection. I was unable to regain it for some time.
Welcome again. So
Thank you.
a question. Yes, here is the question. Let me get back to her question. Yes, there is often considerable difficulty in deciding whether two linguistic varieties or dialects are of the same language or two separate but closely related languages. What could possibly be the reason for this difficulty?
Well, as you know, there is something called genetic linguistics, right? So genetic linguistics uses, or historical linguistics uses genetic analysis to figure out whether a particular dialect derives from one language or from another language. So according to the methodologies of historical linguistics, this is how you figure out whether one dialect comes from one or from another. So I don't think there should be too much difficulty in that. Sometimes there could be convergence because two particular, let's say, languages that derive from the same mother, for example, let's say Spanish and Italian. But if you use etymological and etymological analysis, you will figure it out. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem.
And the question from Almas Batul, does the linguistic system present written manifestations?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Does the linguistic system present written manifestations?
Does the linguistic system present the written manifestations? So that depends on every linguistic system, right?
Sorry, please. She's saying that
the question is
the linguistic system present manifestations, and then she put question mark.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Does the linguistic system has does the linguistic system has written manifestations?
Not every linguistic system has written manifestations.
Yes, ma'am.
There are oral languages as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And yes, I mean that depends on each linguistic system. Now, like for example, there are so many languages in Pakistan that don't have a literary tradition because the majority of them are oral languages. Not the majority, but many of them are oral languages, right? So, and they are small languages as well. And the literacy rate is low, and sometimes they don't have written manifestations. Other times they have a low percentage of written manifestations. Some of the languages don't, at the beginning, they didn't use a particular script. Then a script was assigned to those languages, you know. So it depends on the particular linguistic system.
So thank you. This was the last question, and it's time to say goodbye to all. Indeed, it was a very fruitful session and very engaging and very interactive, and also it provides some insights to researchers who are working on languages, especially particularly who are doing the linguistic studies of Pakistani languages. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria, for being with us and for answering all the questions.
Okay, there is a question here. Turab, I want to answer one question that is here. It says, is it possible to have access to the file of the presentation? The article is already published. It was published in 2015. You can have all the information that has been shared with you. It's already available on Google Scholar. It's available on ResearchGate. It's available on academia. The paper is there. It has been published in 2015, and you can retrieve it anytime. Daniel is asking this question. So yes, it's available.
Thank you so much. We'll share the link of this file in our society group on WhatsApp and also on the page that is the Facebook page of our society. So thank you. I will thank all the participants who joined us from different parts of world, different countries. Indeed, it was a very good session, and hope we will have fruitful sessions in future as well. Thanks everyone and take care. Allah Hafiz.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.